introduce our speaker, Giddeon Massie. He is a two-time Olympian and just an all-around amazing human being, an amazing advocate for people just getting out there and getting on bikes and doing the things they believe in and working hard and setting goals. And so we had Pat here last week, and she's like your biggest fan. So we had a world record holder who's 80 years old last week, and she didn't even know you were coming. And she was like, let me tell you about Giddeon. He is my favorite person. And that's how well known he is in this community. And so I'm really excited, and it was so nice. Like, he made the drive in the rain. All of that weather, all the way. Yes! That's awesome. We appreciate you. So we just can't wait to talk to you. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you. Hear your story.
Yeah, so thanks. I'm from Pennsylvania originally, so the rain isn't that big of a deal. But I have been out here in California for a little while, so I've gotten a little bit soft, and so sometimes it is a bit of a big deal. But so this is cool. I mean, it's obviously a small little setting here, and that's great. I love that. I guess for me, my biggest thing that I enjoy doing, that I'd love to do for you guys, is just kind of open up for questions and stuff like that. But I will share a little bit about me and very briefly in my story and that sort of thing. Do you guys have any idea of like me or what I do, or like what's your tie to cycling? Is there a tie, or is it just more about like learning about me? Can I ask that?
So would someone from my class be willing to share what it is that you're working on?
Yeah, right now we're working with Youth Cycling Association. Sean Wilson, he was a former coach for USA Cycling. He started up this association to help youth cyclists in communities. Right now it's local because he just started it up, but he wants to open it up nationwide to really facilitate programs where youth can be, where youth can learn how to cycle and grow their life skills through cycling. So all quarter long, me and my group and a lot of the people you see here have been working with Youth Cycling Association to really bring awareness to the sport, and that's why it's really cool that you're coming out here to share with students who haven't been working with us for this whole quarter to really like share like how cycling can influence lives and make lives better. So.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Is everybody familiar with that story, that background on this somewhat?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Yeah, so for me, my story kind of is from an athlete standpoint. It starts as a youngster. I didn't get involved in sport at a later time in life, as some athletes have. I started out very organically. Like I said, grew up in Pennsylvania. That's where my family's at, only child. And my dad was involved in sports. He played baseball. My mom was just active. I was probably around the 5th grade or so, around there, when I kind of was introduced to cycling through my dad. At that point, he was looking for things that, one of the things that he did to stay active was cycling. And it was just a very basic social type of setting, that sort of thing. And as a youngster, I would always ask him after he got back from a long ride to say, hey, can we go for a ride? And literally it would just be down to the end of the block and back. And by block, I mean, I'm in a rural setting, so our house, we had a couple of homes nearby, but it was all back roads. Very, very rural setting. The town I grew up in is maybe a town of, I think it's about 8,000 right now, so pretty small. But I would always enjoy that time and the opportunity just to ride with him, but also to be on my bike and have a way to explore my surroundings. My parents stressed education from the start, so anything I did, whether it be cycling or baseball or basketball or anything outside of school extracurricularly, my education came first. I had to keep my grades up. That was part of the deal that we had. I I showed some signs of having some potential in the sport of cycling at an early age. Although I did a lot of different things. Music was something else I was involved in. I played the clarinet for a long time, and that was another thing that my parents stressed. You have to keep your grades up, you have to do music, and then you can do everything else. So they looked for avenues for me to kind of further my cycling. As long as I kept those other things in order, they looked for places to help me kind of see how far I could take it. So fast forwarding a little bit, there's another nearby town called Trexlertown, Pennsylvania. That's a town of about maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people. And it's known nationwide and to some extent throughout the world, as the premier velodrome, which is, do you guys know what a velodrome is? Have you heard of that? No idea? Okay. So let me start there before I go too far. So a velodrome, so cycling, we have road cycling, Tour de France, you guys have heard of that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. On the other side of the spectrum, and in between there's mountain bike and BMX and that sort of stuff. On the other side of the spectrum is track cycling. That's done in a venue called a velodrome. A velodrome is a banked track. The world standard is 250 meters. If you're familiar with the metric system, it's 4 laps to a kilometer. The banking on the tracks is maybe 45, 46 degrees. So you can literally walk up to it and just lean on it. Okay, and then that's how steep it is. So if you ride too slow along the track, you do fall off. And that's just kind of how gravity works in that regard. So the objective is to go fast. And that was very appealing to me. Some venues are outdoors, some are indoors. A setting like this, if you could imagine, seats that are a little bit more uncomfortable and slightly more maybe higher up. You'd be looking down on everything that's happening from any point in the stadium. So you can see the riders warming up, you can see them cooling down, you can see them taking advice from coaches, interacting, and then also the racing that's taking place. So everything's there for you to just kind of soak up. So that's track racing. I grew up near a track. Like I said, it was the foremost in the nation, and certainly to some degree in the world. And so at a young age, I was able to experience the highest level of athlete in that realm on a regular basis, just like they were, just like you and I are having a conversation. We were rubbing shoulders and getting to know like the ins and outs of what made them successful at what they did. So that was my introduction to the sport at a young age. So not only did I get to rub shoulders with them, but in some cases I was being coached by them, really just soaking up that atmosphere. So I took advantage of that. My parents ensured that that was not lost on me, and I think that set the tone for what I ultimately got out of cycling for the next part of my career, and then towards the end as well. Fast forwarding a little bit further, I kept it very fun, not too much stress, albeit we did travel a lot. I spent many early mornings, many long hours in the car traveling up and down the East Coast out to the Midwest, as my parents would shuttle me back and forth to races. Races were not just track, some of them were on the road. And through that, I was able to see different parts of the country. I was able to see, create friendships through other riders that were involved and peers and so forth. And my parents were very present in my cycling career as I was doing that. So anybody that knew me knew my folks, and I'm very grateful for that. They were definitely one of the larger reasons that I was able to do what I was able to do. Sport is very expensive, as some of you may know, not just the travel, but the equipment. So my parents worked very hard to give me every opportunity to see how far I could take it. So 15, 16 years old, I did my first junior national championships. Juniors are 18 and under. That happened to be at my home track in Pennsylvania. did not do as well. Initially, I did not do as well as we kind of had hoped, so it was a bit disappointing. But on literally the final event, final day sort of scenario, I had one event. It was a 500-meter time trial, and I ended up winning that event. That was my first national title as a junior. So very unexpected, but from that point, I kind of got the taste of like, this is pretty cool. Like, this is something where all of the work up to that point, even though it was just fun, kind of paid off, and I saw the result of what all the travel, all the hard work, all of the early mornings, and some of the choosing to spend time training and racing versus going out with friends at that age. I got to see the benefit of that. So 2 years beyond that, I was identified by the national team coach at another national championships, and he invited me to move to Colorado and live at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. So at this point, I'm probably 17 years old, 18 years old, still in high school. Only child, and now I've got an opportunity to move halfway across the country without my parents, to a place that's completely foreign to me. And my parents were supportive of this. They said, hey, this is a great opportunity. Why don't you see what you can do? So with a lot of conversation with the coaches and kind of reassuring my folks that I would be safe there and I would be well taken care of, I got on a plane for the very first time, traveled across the country, and took up residency at the Olympic Training Center. So I basically lived there. That was my life was cycling. I was still pursuing my studies as well in that time because I was still in high school. But I had access to everything that I could want to further my career at that point. So not only was I surrounded by very successful athletes that were also some older, some younger, but I had a full access to an all-you-could-eat cafeteria that had ice cream and like burgers and everything you could possibly imagine. So at that age, I was just enamored by this experience, and went on to spend about the next maybe 7 or 8 years there as a resident athlete. But traveling, that was kind of my hub. That was where I would go back home on holidays. But apart from that, apart from racing and other things, my life was there. So I developed a lot of friendships and kind of had my I'll call it my college experience kind of in that setting. 1998, I did my first international race. That was in Cuba. That was my first experience kind of heading out of the country. 1999, there were a couple other races in there as well, but 1999, then I did my first World Championships as what's called a senior, so seniors 18 and above, or I guess 19 and above. So I was straddling the line of junior racing and senior racing, and there's always a big jump going from the junior ranks to the senior ranks. A lot of times cyclists get to the junior point, the junior ranks, and get to the end of it and say, like, well, what do I do now? Or the level of competition is just so much higher that it's difficult to kind of make that jump to the next level. So for me, I was able to straddle that line and still compete on the junior level, but also start making my mark on the senior level. So I came up, the Olympics started to kind of get on my radar at that point. I think 2000, I might have been on the long team for the 2000 Olympics. The long team is basically the final selection of riders, the pool of riders that can be selected to go to the games. And but I didn't make that team. And it really didn't bother me at that point, because I was just kind of, I didn't have an expectation that I was going to be that close. My sights were set further down the road. But you know, as it worked out, 4 years later, I made my first Olympic team. And as it happens, I competed at the same venue that I had competed at 4 years earlier at a Junior World Championships in Athens, Greece. So I had another teammate at the time, and we kind of followed the same progression, have been teammates throughout, and it was neat for us to go back to a space where we had just literally 4 years earlier were in the birthplace of the Olympics, not really having an understanding of 4 years later you might be competing in the Olympic Games at the same place with so much history. And I think that was a very, that first Olympic experience for me was something that that set the tone even further for the remainder of my career, because there's nothing like representing the U.S. And also having an opportunity to showcase all of your hard work on that stage for that period of time, for those 2.5 weeks. And from that point, I started thinking of, like, okay, I've experienced this amazing thing. How do I get back there? What does that look like? I had some things happen along the way that made that next pursuit of making the next Olympic team somewhat difficult, and maybe I'll touch a little bit on those. But once you have that experience, you start thinking in much more bigger pictures. For us, the Olympics are the pinnacle of the sport. Everything outside of that is World Championships, which happen every year, World Cups, which happen every year, Pan Am Championships, but then Pan Am Games as well. Those happen every 4 years, preceding the Olympics. But really, it's when you're there, once you've experienced that, you really start thinking of, like, what do I need to do to get back there, and then be able to compete on an even higher level. And a lot happens over 4 years. There's no guarantees. You make one team, there's absolutely no guarantee that you're going to make another team 4 years later. So yeah, I was fortunate to make that next team. 4 years after that, I tried to make the London team, and again, I was on the long team. I think we had 5 riders that were in the running for one spot, and I ended up being the second or third rider in that run up, and wasn't selected for the team. So that was a difficult time for me to be so close, and to have those experiences, but then come up ultimately short. So I stayed around the sport a couple years after that, and then I decided to transition into life outside of sport. But some of the memorable things for me, I think, are all that goes into competition at that level, maintaining that level of pursuit, waking up each and every day, even on some days that you don't necessarily feel like doing that one thing, but understanding that ultimately the goal is worth the effort and the pursuit. Heading into 2008, my second Olympics, I think a year or so prior, I hurt my back in the gym, and I remember distinctly when it happened. I was doing a particular exercise, and I didn't think much of it at the time, but I continued to work through it, which was not the right thing to do, but I worked through it, and being the stubborn athlete that I was, I thought, the pain will go away. It didn't go away. I eventually I woke up one morning before a world World Cup. I think maybe it was a World Championships race, and getting ready for this event. And I got out of bed, and I literally, as I tried to walk, my foot would literally just collapse on the ground. And anybody that rides a bike knows that a big part of riding a bike is not only the pushing aspect, but also the pulling aspect. So you have to be able to pull your toe towards your shin to be able to ride very well. I thought when that happened, it's called drop foot. And when that happened, I thought, okay, I should probably maybe take some time to work this out. So I ended up competing that week, but then after that, I got in the span of the next couple months, I got 2 or 3 epidurals to try to calm down what may be happening back there, because it was discovered that I had basically a bulging disc in my back that was contributing to the weakness in my leg, and then also the discomfort that I was feeling. So for a matter of weeks, I had dealt with this, had no idea that's what it was. Tried to address it through those means. It helped, but ultimately it didn't solve the problem. It just kept coming back, and it was limiting my ability to really work as hard as I knew I could, and as I knew I needed to. So I think it was the summer of, I want to say 07, somewhere in there, I had back surgery, and they did a procedure that was meant to basically allow me to continue to pursue sport at a high level. So it's kind of like a quick fix in that sense. So I had surgery, and that was another moment in my, I guess, career where there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of doubt and a lot of a little bit of concern and fear, and having experienced the Olympic Games, but now having potentially something that would keep me from having that experience again. Ultimately, it worked itself out, and I was able to get back to the level that I knew I could be at. It's just that experience, as well as many other challenges along the way that have given me the perspective that I have today on what I do and how I do it, but also sport in general. You can't learn those things and experience those things in a classroom setting. Those are things that when you can say, yeah, this and this could happen to you, but until you have the experience of that happening to you and how you're actually going to handle that and relate to that, those are the things where you're tested as far as like, what do you practice what you preach? What are you made of in some essence, and how important is this thing that you've been working so hard for? How important is it to you to take a step back and say, okay, here's this challenge. Do I allow that challenge to define who I am in that sense, or do I allow it to be something where I step back and say, how do I figure this out? How do I take this particular thing and make it a strength in my life? How do I take it and make it something that is not while it's on the outside it's a terrible thing, on the inside, and looking further, how can I look back on that down the road and say, this was a defining moment that where I know that if something else down the road comes up, I can face that and overcome that. Sport is many instances, great and small, of stuff like that. For every athlete that's been able to make an Olympic team, for every athlete that's been able to stand on the podium at an Olympic Games, for every athlete that has had come up just a little bit short on making an Olympic team, we've all experienced those things. I'm a firm believer that the difference between Olympic athletes and normal people is just that we're very stubborn people, and we're very persistent. Yes, it takes talent, but I'm not the most talented individual out there, but I can assure you, and I have no doubt in my mind that I will outwork anybody else out there in my given field, because this thing is that important to me. Now, I'm going to do it with integrity. I'm going to do it in a way that I can go to sleep at night and say, I give it my best, but I'm also comfortable in saying that if I show up on competition day, that I'm going to perform at a high level because I know how hard I work. I can't control what the next person does. I can't control how hard they work and what they did, whether it was in a way that was carried with integrity, or whether it was something that was untoward. I can't control that, but I know that for me, that next moment isn't scripted, hasn't been written yet. The outcome is to be determined, and but I know that I'm in the best possible position to take advantage of that opportunity. And that mindset has been preceded by many other moments of challenges and doubts and uncertainties and everything else. But it's the over time, the accumulation of those things that have given me the perspective that I now have. I'm incredibly grateful for those. So when I went to, when the sporting aspect came to a close, it wasn't, when that chapter came to a close, it wasn't one where I said, yep, I'm done, I'm ready to go, on to the next thing. It was a bittersweet moment, because for me, for sport, I had worked so hard to get to that point, but again, you're constantly chasing these things, whether it be funding for you to get to the next race, whether it be the lifestyle that's necessary to train at the highest level, to be competitive. I got to the point where I didn't make the London team. We had a program that basically was disbanded. We lost our coach, we lost the housing that we had, we lost everything that we had leading up to that point, and I had to make a decision. Okay, do I go back and start this process again, understanding what's necessary to continue to pursue it at a high level, or do I start looking at other things? And at that point, with some conversations with my parents and those that I trust, decided that it was time to start focusing on other things. I didn't completely write off cycling, but it was a time when, at the age that I was at, I needed to start looking at other things, and I knew that sports. A funny thing is, it's never stagnant. You can't be complacent. There are always going to be younger athletes behind you that want to take your position. There will always be you as an older athlete that's fighting time, and that's the reality of it. But I had plenty of lessons, life lessons that I could take towards my experience in sport and put them towards something else. So I decided to start looking at different avenues, and ultimately I made that tough decision and moved on to the next thing. But I have no regrets in terms of my sporting career. I think the biggest things for me was the fact that I treated what I did as a profession. I treated it with respect, and I treated the pursuit of it as a job. And that meant whether I was accountable to my coach or my teammate next to me on one day, or whether I was by myself living in a house in Belgium you know, on a wet, rainy day, you know, training, I was accountable to myself. And I knew that when the time mattered, when it came time for coaches to select teams, when it came time for me to put the Team USA colors on as an athlete on, you know, at a World Cup or Olympic Games, I needed to be best prepared. And I always felt that I was best prepared. I always felt that I was capable on a given day to be successful. And I think that's a big part of it, is when that opportunity presents itself. Have you done everything else up to that point to say, like, in confidence, like, yeah, here it is, let's go? Or, you know, do you have a doubt, well, I wish I had done this or that, you know, a couple days ago, a couple years ago, or months ago, or whatever. It's just that constant state of preparedness to the degree that, are you doing everything possible on that day? I mean, the Olympic Games, the Olympic athletes, it's waking up doing the same thing to some degree, maybe not the same thing, but having the same focus and determination towards something that somebody else might label as monotonous. You're pursuing with excellence. I took it to the point that I wanted to sleep better than anybody else. I wanted a more restful sleep than the person next to me. I wanted an extra, 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I would take naps during the day. I would walk down the snack aisle in the grocery store and look at the things that I wanted to eat, but then be like, I'm just gonna keep walking, because that's not gonna help me get closer to my goal. It's something where somebody looks at it and says, man, that's a lot of work. Like, that just doesn't sound fun to me. And that doesn't sound like anything that's worthwhile. Like, what difference does it make that you stayed out late one day? What difference does it make that you spent 2 hours walking around the mall when you have a hard training session the next day? Those are the things, to me, where I could show up on a competition day and say, I may not be the most talented, but I know that I've done all these things that are the 1% difference that could be the difference that allows me to be successful over the next person on that day. And I love that. I love that about sport, because those are things, the other thing is, like, those are things within your control, and those are things that, maybe you can't quantify to some degree, but when you're talking about an athletic event that the difference between being on a podium and not is literally a thousandth of a second, making a team and not is a thousandth of a second, advancing to the next round of an event, is a tire whip. What's to say that one moment of eating the right thing, or sleeping, or adding that extra weight on your bar, what's to say that hasn't somehow contributed to you being able to, if nothing else, in confidence, show up and say, I'm ready to perform at my best. So I think all of those things are pieces that are directly attributable to life, whether it be arts, business, family, all of those things, because those are things that people can't take away from you. How you handle situations, how you choose to pursue a certain thing, that's all within your realm of choices. And it's just about making choices. It's about being disciplined, and it's about being thoughtful in terms of, is this thing here going to help me get towards this other thing? And it's pretty simple when you know the lifespan of an athlete is minute. Okay, I've spent 15, 20 years national team as an athlete, but God willing, I've got a whole bunch of years after that. What does that look like? How has this period of time, there's an expiration date on this. I can't be an athlete forever. I wish I could, but, well, I guess I could, just not very good at it. But when you have that period of time, are you willing to devote all of your resources towards that one period of time where people are gonna say, hey, come and do this, or come and do that, like come hang out here, that's not a big deal. Are you willing to devote all of your energy towards that minute window to see what you're capable of? Knowing that, you know, down the way, like you'll have opportunity to do those other things. That's kind of the mindset and I think it's consistent through not every athlete, but many athletes. And I love that. I love that about sport. I really do. So, yeah. So that's a little bit about, I guess, me and a little bit about my mindset towards sport and the Olympics and that sort of thing. I hope that's useful in some senses. Do you guys have any?
I gotta give you a round of applause. That's good too. Wow, baby. You just presented that very well, and I'm just like loaded with questions.
Oh wow, that's great. That's great. I'm glad to hear that.
So I have one really quick question before we launch into Q&A, just because some of you might have a class where you might need to get out of here at some point, although we're going to do Q&A and Gideon's the best ever, but I would love to do a group photo before we start losing anyone, of no fault of anything about this, but just because class and attendance and all that good stuff. Would it be okay if we do that and then go into Q&A from there?
Totally.
All right, cool. So can I